informational video on making a conference poster for the Connecticut Conference on Natural Resources. This is Laura Cisneros from the Natural Resources Conservation Academy. And my goal for this series of videos is to help you create your own professional conference poster, as well as help break it down into easy, manageable units so that it's not so overwhelming. The conference is a fun and exciting event, and we're all looking forward to seeing you and hearing about your conservation work. Okay, we're now going to start editing each section of the poster. And we typically start with the material and methods section because we know what we're going to do for a project or we've already completed it, so it's easy to list out the various steps. The introduction, results, and conclusion sections require a little bit more research or analyses, so why not start with the easier section? To start editing the material and methods section, simply click in the general area of the material and methods, then go down to the lower right-hand corner and click this plus sign to zoom in. You can see that I've provided some example content of what goes in this section. All content here can be edited to be tailored to your project, including the headers. So the header here, material and methods, this is just an example of what you can keep as a header. You could also change it to be simply methods. You could also change this to just be procedures, whatever's more fitting for your project. And in a little bit, we'll review some other past NRCA posters so that you can get an idea of different headers and formats that are used by our students for their projects that may be more suitable. For now, we'll just keep this as methods. You'll also notice that I recommend using subheaders here. These subheaders help us break up the different components of your project so it's easy for the reader to quickly glean what you did. The subheaders are typically a smaller font size, so you can see that this font size is 34, the main header is 44. The subheaders are also different in some ways that helps them be separated from the main headers. So for example here, all the subheaders I made a lighter shade of blue, they're smaller in font, and I've also italicized them. But you could do a number of things to help separate from the main header. You maybe don't want to italicize it, so you can click this here. Maybe you want to underline it or change the shade, the color to green. You can do whatever you'd like. But no matter what, whatever you decide to go with, make it consistent throughout the poster. So if you're going to go with this style, make sure to change all the other subheaders so that they're consistent, whatever you decide to go with. And the same with the main headers. Feel free to change the font color to whatever you'd like. Let's say you want a darker blue. You don't have to have it in all caps. You decide. But no matter what, make sure that you keep this consistent with the other headers, such as the results one that's over here in the corner. You're going to want to change that to a darker blue if that's the color you're going with. It's just an example. Okay, so we're going to just undo this quickly. Okay. So, and then another thing that I recommend is using bullet point format, as you can see here. And I recommend bullet point format again because it helps the reader to quickly pick out what you did step by step for your project. If you prefer to use a paragraph style here, try and make them smaller paragraphs, such as this one. Bigger, bulkier paragraphs are more cumbersome to read, and it will be more difficult for the reader to stand there and quickly figure out what you did. So we want to make it easy and facilitate the way they are gleaning knowledge from your poster. So bullet points work really well. All right. Oh, and another thing. So if you wanted to change the bullet points, all you have to do is highlight your text, go up into the paragraph tab up here, and you can choose from the type of bullet points that they have. Again, if you change the bullet points here, make sure that you change bullet points in any other section of the methods as well as other parts of your poster. So if you have bullet points elsewhere. All right, we're now ready to start editing the content here so that it contains the information relevant to your project. So you can simply highlight what I have written and replace it with your content. So you can just start typing away. In this section right here, I recommend if you want to put something right here before discussing different aspects of your project under the subheaders, you can have a general comment about the various components of your project. For example, you could say this project consists of 2 components. Oops. And then you can generally describe what those 2 components are before going into more detail below. But if you don't want to use that section and you just want to dive right into the various subheaders, go ahead, you can delete that part and start working below. So I've provided some general recommendations of the type of information that typically goes into a methods section of a research poster, but this might not be relevant for all of your projects. Some of you are not focusing on particular organisms, so you might want to delete that part. But for now, let's just pretend that, let's just go about filling this out just to give you an example. So you all have conducted your project somewhere, so you have a study area. So this part of the subheader will be relevant for everybody. So first, let's describe where your project was conducted. And I'm just going to make this up. This study was conducted in Storrs, Connecticut. There you go. You answered the first one. Then you can describe the type of environment that your study was conducted in. You may have one study site, you may not have really study sites at all, you may just have a general area that you're working in, but you can describe the type of environment that it involves. So, and this is going to be dependent also on the focus of your project. Maybe you have a larger landscape focus. Maybe you're focusing on forest plots or ponds or something along those lines. So it's going to be dependent based on your project. But just to give you some examples, you can say, let's pretend I had 15 study sites. So I could say the 15 study sites were located in an agricultural landscape. Let's say that was my focus. I was interested in understanding how agriculture was impacting my various sites. Or let's say that we were interested in ponds or wetlands or something along those lines. We could say the 15 sites, or we could say our 15 pond sites, if we were studying ponds, were located close to campus. Just to, if these sites were located on the Storrs UConn campus, for example. Or let's say I was installing bat houses in a variety of environments. I could say the 15 bat houses were situated in forest edge, riparian, and wetland habitats. Again, these are all examples. It's going to be dependent on your project. All right. Well, I already answered this question. How many sites do I have? And you may not have a number of sites. You may be working in just a general area. So this may be relevant to your study. It may not. But I already answered it above, so I could delete that. And then I could talk about my study organism. So if you're focusing on a study organism, you could say we surveyed all Connecticut bat species at the 15 sites, for example. Or if you're focusing on a particular taxa, that's a group of animals or group of species, you could say we surveyed, this particular taxa, like amphibians or whatnot. But if you're focusing on a particular species, you could say something along the lines as, let's say I was just interested in one species, the big brown bat. I could say we surveyed the sites for the big brown bat. And when I'm talking about a particular species and I'm using their common name, you don't want to use just the common name. You want to make sure that you include the species name in there so that someone knows exactly what you're talking about. Because the big brown bat could have multiple names, multiple common names. And so we don't want any confusion there. So you want to make sure that you include the species name. So for the big brown bat, it's Eptesicus fuscus. And so when we're writing out a species name, we always italicize, so you can highlight that and italicize it. The genus name is always capitalized, and then the specific epithet, the second part of their species name, is always lowercase. So make sure you remember to do that. There you go. Once you have written out what particular species you're discussing, you can refer to the common name for the rest of the poster, but you want to make sure that you have this in here at least once. Also, if you prefer to just use the species name, after you've referred to the full name, the next time that you refer to the species name, you could abbreviate it like this: E. fuscus. And I'll just write out a sentence. Were surveyed using acoustic monitoring devices. And then you always want to remember to italicize. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're working with an organism. But let's say you're not working with an organism, you could delete this section completely and take this out, alter this so that it fits what your study is doing more so. But I'll leave this in here for now, just as an example. Okay, and then you want to go about doing the same thing with your data collection protocol. So how did you collect that data? So you're going to want to sit down, maybe take out a piece of paper or just right here and start going step by step. How did you collect that data so that someone can understand and get a good idea of what you did? What type of equipment were you using? And then what were the dates that you collected this data? The dates and times, it doesn't need to be so specific, but we need a general time idea of what months the data were collected in, how many times you went out, what time of day, if that's relevant. Those are various things that you want to keep in mind. And in a little bit, we'll go review past student posters so that you can see more of what type of data they include for this part. So I'm not going to fill this out here since it's easier just to look at examples online. And so, as you can see right here, this is going to be tailored to your particular project. So this setup might not work for you. Again, we'll go see some examples online of past student projects that will give you a better idea of how you can tailor the methods section to your particular project. But I want to talk about one other thing. So you may have, as you're listing out the various things that you did for your project, you may be thinking, wow, this is a really, really tiny space. How am I going to fit all of my methods here? And this is really tiny because I was just giving you some examples, some quick examples, but your methods section probably will be a little bit larger than this area. And so, as you can see, you can edit this template. It's not frozen like this. You can move things around so that it better accompanies the type of text and figures that you're going to have. And so I'm going to pretend like I have a lot more writing for the method section. I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff here just as an example. Let's say I had that much text, and you're like, oh man, Laura put these placeholders for these figures here, and I can't fit the rest of my methods. What do I do? Well, first of all this text right here, this is explaining how to use Excel or Word or embed pictures to create figures. So this is just here to help give you advice on how to do that, how to add figures to your poster, so you can delete this section completely. And then what you want to do is you want to click on, if something's in the way, you just click on this, and you can hit Shift to click on another thing to be able to move the two objects together, and then you hit the down arrow and it will move down for you. So voila, you've got more room, plenty more room to add to your methods. And I actually just remembered one more thing that I want to talk about before we go review posters online. So I'm going to zoom in here. Okay, so one thing you want to make sure when you're talking about a subheader that I recommend adding, which I did not include here, and I might do so in future templates, but you have your data collection protocol, and one more header that we probably want to add is this. And so I copied and pasted that. It's now that we want to make it the same font as the ones above, which are, oh, those were 34. So let's highlight that, change it to 34. Remember, you want these to always be consistent. Okay, and so something that a very important subheader that I forgot is data analysis. So if you're doing any sort of analysis, you're going to want to mention what you did in particular. So I'm going to change this back and add a bullet point. There we go. So if you're, seeing if some environmental variables are correlated with some species, and you used a correlation analysis, you can say association, whoops, gotta change this back, so you can highlight it, it's bold, unitalicize it, and change it to black so that's matching up here. So you can say associations between environmental variables, and I don't know, biodiversity, let's say, were assessed using, let's say, Spearman correlations, for example. So you may do a correlation. There's a variety of ways you can do correlation, so make sure you know the exact way. So there's a particular correlation analysis called Spearman correlation. There's another one called that if you use Excel to do a correlation, you're doing a Pearson correlation. So make sure you're figuring out the exact statistical analysis that you're doing. Maybe for some of you, you're going to quantify some sort of biodiversity index, or if you're quantifying some blanking on different type of statistical analyses or indices, but let's say you want to quantify diversity. So you could say diversity at each site was quantified, and quantified just means calculated, so you could replace that with calculated using Simpson's diversity index. Okay, so make sure you're being specific about how you actually calculated it, so someone can go back and repeat what you did. And make sure that the analyses that you report here in your methods match up with what you're actually reporting in the results. Okay, so we can stop here and let's go review some posters online. To review past student posters, first go to the nrca.uconn.edu website and then click on Past NRCA Students. You'll then be brought to a page that has a series of tables with all our past students and their posters. You can see their posters by simply clicking on a name. So we'll click on this one first. So I chose this one because this student more or less used the poster template that I provided, which was great. It worked perfectly for her project. Except, as you can see in the methods section, she did change the subheaders to be more appropriate for what she was doing for her project. So this student, she just provided a general description right here of what the two different components of her project were, which were creating a chapter for an Osprey book, as well as she worked on the maintenance of some Osprey nest platforms in Essex, Connecticut. So one section talks about working on the nests and the relevant information there. And then the second section talks about what she did to create her book chapter on Osprey. You'll also notice here that she's referring to figures. So when we refer to a figure, we typically write fig dot and whatever the number is for the figure to refer to it. This one specifically is referring to what the nest platforms look like, and so we can go down to figure 4. These are the nest platforms. She did that with figure 3, which are referring to there's a live cam on those nest platforms, and so these are live feed videos from those platforms. And so I highly recommend using referring to a lot of figures, a lot of pictures. Those can tell the reader so much more than you can in words. So you want more figures, more pictures, more the merrier. She also did include a table here too for her results section, which is referred to down here. So if you're referring to a table, you do table and then the number of that table. Okay, so that's just one example. Let's go see another one. Choose this one. I chose this one because she did alter the original template, which was great because it helped facilitate her work and her figures. So where the methods were on the template, she instead put a map that she got from ArcGIS, which you all know how to use now, of her study sites. So these are her study sites in a watershed. So if you have multiple study sites, I encourage you to include a map so that we can see where they are located, what the type of environment is around them. So let's go down to her methods section. She pretty much used the same headers and subheaders that I had on the template, which was fine. And she addressed each of those individual questions. So you can go back to different past posters and see how they are responding, what type of information they're including in there, just to get an idea for your project. Again, she referred to figures. If you're referring to more than one figure, you do figs, dot, and then the numbers that it refers to. So these are referring to her 8 study sites, which are up here, so a map, as well as some photos of what her study sites looked like. And then finally, in her data collection protocol and analysis section, she talked about how the data was collected. It was collected by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection using electrofishing. A lot of people may not know what electrofishing is, so she referred to a figure that showed us what electrofishing is. She also included photos of her study organism, which I encourage you to do, and she could have referred to that figure here as well if she wanted to. So that's another example. And then one last example. So I chose this one because this is not a typical research project. It's a project on educating her community about invasive plants, which is a great project. And so she needed a different format to talk about her methods or what she did for her project. So you may not have a methods section per se, but more of a what you did section per se. So her what she did sections are broken up into 2 areas. So she did 2 things. She did a workshop. So she created a box that discussed that workshop and different subheaders that talk about how she planned it and how she went about implementing it, and included some photos during that workshop. And then she talked about a brochure that she created and what went into that brochure. She also brought this brochure with her to the Connecticut Conference on Natural Resources to show people. And so that's another example. So I encourage you to come back to this page to visit all the other posters and get ideas of what you can include on your methods section. Still have more questions or need more help? As always, feel free to contact me at laura.cisneros@uconn.edu or by phone. I also recommend that you visit the NRCA website. It's filled with a lot of great information, especially the community projects and past NRCA pages. Those pages have all the posters done by our past NRCA students, and you can get an idea of content to put in your posters, as well as different ways of displaying your content and information. I hope you found this informational video helpful, and we're all looking forward to seeing you and your poster at the Connecticut Conference on Natural Resources.